So welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining. My name is Nichelle Savory, and I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate at Drexel University College of Medicine. I will be co-hosting this session with my co-chair, and I'll turn it over to her to let her introduce herself before we get to the panelists.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nurul Sulimai. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. I'm here to co-chair with Nichelle. Nichelle, I'll hand it to you.
So just before we get to introduction, just to go over some housekeeping messages. So the roundtable is scheduled for 1 hour. We do have some questions that we have prepared for the panelists, but we highly encourage you to ask questions. So there are two ways that you can ask questions. You can either hit the raise hand icon. Nurul is going to unmute you. You can ask the group, or you can simply type it in the chat, and one of us will read it out for you. So after the first 30 or 40 minutes, we're going to break you guys out into breakout sessions, breakout rooms actually, where there will be an academic or an industry representative where you can interact further with them. And lastly, so this session is going to be recorded, and the recording will be available to all active NNS members. Alrighty. So let's get to the panelists. So we have 6 panelists. So we have Mr. Raymond Mueller, who's Vice President of Human Resources at Indiana Biosciences Research Institute. We have Dr. Alexandra Schober, Principal Scientist 2 at Novartis Biomedical Research. Dr. Stephanie Howell, who's a Senior Neuroscientist and Director of Research Integration at Center for Neuroscale. Dr. Michael Lecker, who's the Dean of College of Health Professions at University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. Dr. Barrington Burnett, Professor and Vice Chair for Research at the Department of Anatomy, Physiology, and Genetics at Uniformed Services University. And lastly, we have Dr. Tracy Costello, Assistant Dean of Postdoctoral Affairs and Graduate Student Success at University of South Florida.
Nichelle, can I add a little bit of something to everyone? That we gratefully acknowledge the panelists for sharing their invaluable experiences here. However, the views and opinions presented here are solely those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the official position of their respective institution. With that, back to you, Nichelle.
Great. So the first question I have for you guys, and I know this is going to be different based on experiences with industry and academia. So what are the most common mistakes trainees make during interviews, and how can they avoid these mistakes? I'm actually going to call in people randomly. Mr. Mueller, any advice, any take on this?
Can you hear me?
I can. Yes, I can.
Okay, so we're going to go straight into the question of interviews. Look, I think the most important thing in an interview is that you've got to be yourself. Companies or organizations are interested in finding out more about you. So I think you need to be able to present to whoever's interviewing you the essence of who you are and what your interests are, and do so in a way that portrays yourself, as opposed to you being in an interview concerning yourself about what are the right things that I should be saying to this person. At the end of the day, that's a game you can only play for a short period of time. So I would just say the most important thing is be yourself and make sure that you're interested in being in the interview. Now, that might sound like weird advice, but, yawning, looking at your watch, looking at your phone, as silly as that may sound, these are things that people do in interviews. So I think what most people are looking for is a level of engagement. They're looking for a level of curiosity, and they're looking for a genuine level of interest. And I think you need to find the way to portray that within the bounds of who you are personally and how you can convey that to people. So I think in any interview, a good, intense one-on-one discussion is what the interviewer is looking for.
Thank you. Dr. Burnett?
Yeah, so I think it's a spectrum of things that people do in interviews that can be a little bit off, and it comes at the two ends of it. It's the first one we've noticed a lot is there people who apply for academic jobs and have no idea about the department that they're applying to, the school that they're applying to, the overall mission of that school or the department, and so they come in and they don't show how they fit in, right? Whenever we put out a job offer for an academic job, we're looking for somebody to fit into, to be a colleague and to fit into our ecosystem. And so one of the things that you want to do is just not come out and say, I'm really special and you should take me, but I'm special. And here's how my speciality or my specialness can help you as an organization. The other thing that we tend to see in as interview mistakes is that people try to be too malleable in that they've done their research, they know about the place, but now they want to be something that they think you're looking for, and it's not who they are. So Dr. Mueller just said before, authenticity goes a very far way. And so just because you saw the job description and the department says it's looking for this, you cannot change who you are just to fit the job description, right? It's probably not a job for you really if you have to change your or attempt to change your CV to fit in that position. So it's two part, not knowing enough about the job and how you fit in and or knowing a lot about what the job is and try to change your CV in the interview.
Thank you. Dr. Costello?
So I agree with all of that. And I will add that the experience for academics versus industry, my recommendation would be to show up in that way, right? Exactly like you're talking about, to say that you know what they need, that you know what they're about, that you know how you fit in with what that experience is. And it doesn't really matter what you're applying to, that truth is truth. We have to coach, if you're on the job market, you need to be focused on what the employer needs, no matter what sector you're showing in, because you have to, show that you're that good fit. So what I'll add to that conversation is going in with some great questions. So as you've read the job description, maybe as you've talked to other people who work at that organization or in similar roles even, that might generate questions that you have, because in as much as you are trying to show your value and how you fit the skill set that they need, you are also trying to make the decision if this is the right job for you. So interviews, while they feel like the other person is asking you questions and it feels like an interrogation, I encourage turn that into a conversation and make sure that you're thinking, not just how can I show them value that they want me, but how do I actually want them also, right? Like it is a two-way street once you get through that interview space.
Dr. Howell?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's covered a lot of the really big points pretty well. Something that I think I would probably add is in those interviews when you're being asked the questions of, what have you done? What are your research interests? Somebody's already kind of seen those points on your CV already. So go beyond just kind of those initial responsibility listing feels in the conversation and really start to get at what you actually did, how you contributed to projects in specifics, rather than just, I analyzed data. Okay, well, what did you use? How did you use it? What changed because of the work that you did? What kind of challenges were you able to overcome? And I think, that conversation is a little bit different if you're interviewing academic versus industry. That industry conversation is going to be a little bit more tailored towards that behavioral aspect of what are those challenges that you had to overcome? How did you work with a team? How did you collaborate this way? So really building on that foundational academic background that you have and kind of fitting that into how that's a little bit different in the industry perspective.
Okay. Dr. Lecker?
Yeah, I think most of it was already covered. So I think one point, and it really has been already made in a way, but the most difficult interviews for me are the interviews where questions are being asked and the applicant answers a question with maybe 2 or 3 sentences, and that's it. And then goes on to the next question, and you get another 2, 3 sentences to answer the question. I think those are the most difficult interviews for me. And so I really look forward to candidates that will engage me in a conversation, even when I'm asking them question. And follow up, I think, is very, very important, at least from my perspective. The best interview that I have ever seen, and it was really only one person that ever managed to do that, where an entire table of interviewers, and there were about 20 of them, where the candidate turned it around and essentially interviewed the interviewers, right? And that was just spectacular. So if you can do that, that would be really my advice, trying to get to that point where you're interviewing the other person.
Dr. Schober?
Yeah, everybody said all the things I was thinking at this point. So I don't want to repeat everything everyone said, but I think the being yourself during the interview and letting your nerves get the best of you is probably the worst mistake you can make. Sometimes it helps to just say, look, I'm super excited to be here, so I'm really nervous, and that can break the ice. And everyone's been in an interview, so they know that it's uncomfortable and they feel for you, but just be yourself and come prepared. Make sure you're prepared to speak about yourself in the context of the position you're applying for and the type of position you're applying for, like academia or industry. You're going to have very different mindsets. So just make sure you do a lot of research into how you should be thinking and responding to the questions they're asking you.
Thank you. So question 2, what advice do you have for trainees who feel nervous or lack confidence going into these interviews? I know some of you briefly touched on it a little bit. Dr. Schober, because I think you touched on it.
Yeah. This is my favorite one because I'm a very nervous person, and I always struggled with lack of confidence throughout my career, even still. So the imposter syndrome is very real. It does get better. You just get better at dealing with it. I'll say that much. But the advice I have, I guess, is if you don't know about imposter syndrome first, look into that. Typically, high achievers feel this, and is a very normal thing to feel. And just, like I said, you can break the ice by saying you're super nervous because you're really excited about this interview, and just practice interviewing with as many people as you can. And also the best way to seem confident is to just tell yourself that you are, even if it's not necessarily true. If you convince your brain that you are, you'll be more confident. So you can trick yourself into being confident, essentially.
Dr. Burnett?
Yeah, so we see that a lot, quite a lot. And one of the things, I don't know if it works or not, this is something that I've used myself personally, is that I've never had an interview for a faculty position, junior faculty position, or anything, or even senior positions here, that the person who I was interviewing wasn't the expert at what they were talking about. There was no one in that room that when you're doing a job interview is going to be a bigger expert because they didn't live your life. They didn't have your experience. So by default, you're an expert. So you should go into that room with the confidence that you're an expert. So you ask yourself, why am I nervous? I'm nervous because I want this job. Well, you explain that. I'm nervous because I really want this job and I really want you to like me. But you shouldn't be nervous because you feel like somebody else knows more than you, because I will tell you that I've never seen it happen, right? So you should go in with that confidence. There's nothing against being nervous in an interview. Lack of confidence, though, will project. And somebody's hiring you, they do not want a person who lacks confidence. So that's something you need to iron out. You're not going to iron out in the interview. So I would say trust in your training, trust in what you know, trust in that I am going to do the best job at this at this than anyone who takes that job, and convey that to the other persons. Now you don't know who they're going to see. They might see somebody who's more confident and stronger than you, but that's not your problem, right? That's their problem to evaluate. So I would say go into every job saying that I am the best version of me for this job, and that there's nothing you can do about the other bits and pieces that you have no control over. But you are the expert, really. Every time you go in an interview, you are the expert, and you got to believe that.
Thank you. Mr. Mueller?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I just want to apologize that I'm a disembodied voice here, but just had some IT issues with my computer here. So maybe it's a good thing you don't see me. Look, I'll tell you what, in terms of being in the interview, the way this has been framed, if you've been able to get through the process to get to an interview, you're already a winner. I think one of the biggest frustrations that a lot of people have is just getting the darn interview in the first place because it is so difficult. Prior to me working for the IBRI, which is a fairly small research institute, I'd worked for Eli Lilly and Company, which is a very large pharmaceutical company. Anytime we posted a scientific position, we would have hundreds, sometimes thousands of applicants. So to winnow your way through that application process to actually get to an interview, you're being interviewed by people who have big jobs, they're busy, they have a lot of things that they've got to get done. They would not be wasting their time if they didn't think that you had something to add and that you were a potential candidate for the job. So I really think that you need to give yourself a pat on the back for getting into the interview process and saying, I got this. Now, you may not get the job because you're up against other good candidates, and that will happen. I think we've all experienced that. But just getting into the interview procedure should help to allay some of the fears that you have that you maybe don't belong there. They would not be wasting their time interviewing you if they didn't think that you were a potential candidate for the job. So go in with that level of confidence.
Thank you. Dr. Howell?
Yeah, I think I want to echo the idea of that lived experience point that was made. You were the only one that has lived what you lived. You know why you chose the variables you did. You know what your project was, why you did it, why you chose the things that you did. You've researched the background on it. So you are the expert on your projects, on the things that you've done. So really being able to be comfortable in explaining the whys in the application, that just being confident enough to explain the application, especially in the context of an industry interview, I think is really, really important. But yes, you are the expert in what you've already done, so it's just a matter of kind of being able to portray that confidence in that lived experience that you've had.
Thank you. Dr. Costello?
Yeah, so I love everything that everybody said, and I agree, echo all of that. So from a training perspective, because that's what I spend my days thinking about, professional development for grad students and postdocs and people in early career and thinking forward. I want to give you two practical things that you can do. And so the first is based on a book by Amy Cuddy called Presence. She also has a TED Talk. And this is the power pose, right? Making yourself big, putting yourself in some kind of pose where and do it for 2 minutes, right? To psych yourself up, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is it's called box breathing. And it effectively is breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, and then hold for 4 seconds. And if you do a couple rounds of that, you're actually triggering your vagus nerve and you induce calmness in yourself. So I highly recommend it. I was in a stressful event earlier today, and I was in a meeting, and I was just like, nobody's gonna know that I'm doing this, and nobody has to even see that, right? So if you're in person or yeah, you don't have to worry about that. Nobody's gonna see you. You're actually just breathing, just controlling the way that you do that. And so I will give you those two quick tips that will hopefully save you in a matter of minutes if you need that quick rescue.
Thank you. Dr. Lecker?
Yeah, I certainly can echo what all the speakers have said before, and I want to follow up a little bit about Raymond's comments. And I think it's really important for the candidate to understand that I, as a dean, already invested heavily in you. I paid for interviews. I paid to bring you on campus. I paid your flight, your meals, and so on. And especially where we are located, those are significant expenses. So just remember that when you're in the interview, people already want you to be successful. And also remember that you're not in that place because you don't have any confidence. You must have displayed confidence before, otherwise you wouldn't be in that space. And even if you stumble sometimes, and I don't know if that's common for everyone, but it's certainly common here that, if there's one stumble, we will try to help you out to get out of that because we made that investment into you already and want you to be successful.
Thank you. So before we move on, I just want to ask the audience, are there any questions? Give it like a minute or so before I move to the next question.
I don't see anything on the chat box.
There's
Oh, there is a one. Someone here.
Thank you all for being here today. I'm like a mid-career graduate student right now, so I'm in my third year, and I was curious, when someone is kind of applying for either postdocs or being on the job market, you've kind of so far talked about exuding confidence and things like that to, show that you want to be there and make yourself look impressive as well. But I guess what my question is how do you kind of break the threshold for, if everyone that you're competing against is exuding that same level of confidence, how do you go past that threshold to really secure the position, whether it's postdoc or a proper job in like at a company or something like that?
Anyone is free to answer. I'm not going to pick on anyone.
I can take a shot at that. And this is really from the academic point of view. And I think number one, you have to be very cognizant that you're being interviewed or screened for at different levels. So frequently there's a departmental level, there's a chair level, there's a dean level, and everyone really looks at something different of what they're looking for, right? In general, from my experience, departmental committees really look at your skills and what you bring to the table. And frequently they want to know, if we hire you, do your skills in a way help me as well, right? To can do better science than I can right now. And secondly, they're often also asking the question, would I feel comfortable sitting next to you for the next 20 years? A share probably will ask very much similar questions, but also would want to see if you fit in within the mission and the goals of the department. So you definitely need to know, what are the goals of that department? Do you fit in there? And I can speak for myself as a dean. I'm really looking for people that have indicated some kind of leadership during their training, have shown that they start out with something and can build it over time. And then whether you fit in with the mission and goals of the college. And I think if you can hit all of those, you're certainly outstanding, in my opinion. But that also requires that you have a very good understanding of the institution and the department that you're applying to.
So I want to jump in and add to that. One of the questions that I include when I'm lecturing on interviews is a question that you might receive as the candidate. And the question is, why should we pick you versus other candidates? But the real answer to that is that in some ways, you can't compare yourself to other candidates because you don't even know who they are, right? So the only thing in that space that you can do is highlight your skills, highlight your fit, talk about how you're connected, like the mission is this, and the work that I'm doing is this, and this is how I can make this connection. And if that's the connection that they're looking for, then you might be the one that's picked. And if they're looking for something that's a little bit different and someone else has a slightly better, whatever fit is defined as, because it is a very sticky wicket, but whatever that is, you can only make the case for you and why you're excited about the role and why your skills and experiences connect with what they're looking, what you think they're looking for again. And that's the answer, no matter whether you're thinking about it from your side coming in or whether that's actually a question that they ask you, and sometimes they do. And it can come from both academics and industry. So, think about it from your own perspective of why am I excited about this? And then that's what you go in with is my best recommendation.
Yeah, and just as a closing thought to that, Tracy, I love everything that you just said. I would say that it's not just about sitting there and talking about having the right experience for a particular job. It's making sure that you're able to demonstrate, how you think as a person, display how you communicate as a coworker, as a person yourself. And then how you're going to function, be able to display how you can function within that specific environment, whether that's academic or industry related.
So one thing I'd like to add to this topic, so given that I'm talking from a previous industry experience and a small research institute, talking about it from a large company's perspective, if you're a young scientist and you're coming along to a company for an interview, it can be a daunting process, and you may end up meeting with a large number of people. Typically, what you would do is you'd meet with an HR person or a recruiter up front, and they then may in turn send you to some scientists who may be peers. They may send you to the senior scientist of the laboratory, the director of the institute, or the vice president of the whole unit. And I think this can be daunting because every one of them you're wanting to obviously put on your best show. Doesn't do you any harm right up front when talking to the initial person that you talk to, is to say, can you briefly explain to me what is the interview procedure and decision-making process that you will be going through? Not a bad idea for you to get a little bit of information to understand, well, who's going to make the decision here? I mean, you might put on your best show with the vice president of the unit, and that person may not be the decision maker. The decision maker may well be the senior scientist in the laboratory. So it's good for you to get a little bit of an understanding of what you're dealing with. Sometimes you're having a cursory interview just to introduce yourself to the person and for them to see you. Others are far more vested. You're going to be reporting to this individual, and that supervisor is going to have their own interests and their own desires for what they want out of this individual. So I think by all means, spend a little bit of time asking those questions. They're not inappropriate. Any good HR or recruiting individual would be happy to take you through at least a general rundown of what the process, which then allows you to be somewhat forearmed as you go into these discussions of understanding that you may need to tune your answers a little differently for the 4 or 5 people who are all asking you the same darn question. And it'll give you a little bit of confidence as you go into that. So do think a little bit about that. It's not inappropriate for you to ask questions about the process, and any good professional will give you a good answer on that.
Anyone else would like to add anything? Do you have any more questions before I move on? Alrighty, I'm going to move on to the question that we have. So how should trainees address gaps in their resume or lack of direct experience during an interview? Dr. Howell?
There it goes. Yeah, the gaps in the resume for me when I'm looking at resumes that are coming in from, my position is really kind of hybrid. I deal with a lot of clinical operations. I deal with the rehabilitation, but I also am very research heavy, right? So in my particular position, am less concerned about specific gaps in a resume than I am about how a person can describe the application of what their experience is. just because you don't have experience in one particular area that we're looking at doesn't necessarily mean that you can't communicate effectively how you've done and managed to learn other aspects of your career. Because when you started in grad school, you knew nothing, right? So you had to get taught some things. You learned some things along the way. You overcame challenges. And I'm looking for more of a well-rounded individual that can apply what they've learned in an academic environment to that industry or to whatever environment we're going to be working in, rather than specific task gaps, if you will. So for me, that well-rounded individual that has maybe not done, a mile wide, but you've gone a mile deep on particular aspects, if you can kind of help translate that and explain how you've gotten to where you're at, that's what is most important for me.
Dr. Schober?
Yeah, I agree with everything she just said. So I think probably one of the most important things you can do is like not make excuses for your lack of knowledge or a gap. Acknowledge it and just say, maybe, I haven't had direct experience with this yet, but maybe you have experience with something that has similar skills, or just highlight, everyone knows if you have a PhD, you're really good at teaching yourself something, but give a specific experience or time when you've had to learn and adapt something very complex and quickly, and give a very specific, experience with outcomes applied to it. So I feel like that's all you can really do is, acknowledge it and then say how you can help fill that gap if you were hired.
Thank you. Dr. Burnett?
Yeah, so on the academic side, the gaps that we actually see more is gaps in productivity or gaps in working experience, and so those are I'll deal with that gaps because all the other gaps have been sufficiently covered. And so 9 times out of 10, when there's a gap in productivity or a gap in out of the workforce or something, it's life, right? And life happens, and all of us go through life. We don't talk about it because we're analytical and we talk about the science and we stay to be above board, but it kind of humanizes you. So if you can go in and say, hey, I stopped out and I thought I wanted to have kids and that was my priority at that time, we absolutely appreciate that, right? If we say, you know what, I took a detour because I really wanted to make sure this is what I want as a career. Love those answers as well. So I would say, tell us why those are gaps. I'm sure I have gaps there too. Everyone was like, "Did you go to work those 2 years? I didn't see you publish anything." And we were doing things. And so those are the gaps. I would say just introduce life, and that life happens. There were family situations I had to attend to. That became priority. People understand that. The second part is the experience part, and I think a lot of times in grad school, I know in qualifying exams and all that, we try to put you on a pedestal and have you do everything all on your own. But when you graduate, science is team science. And so if you have a lack of direct experience, this is where your collaborative bona fides gets to kick in. And that's where you say, hey, I don't do this, but why would I? I have a great electrophysiologist in our department, and I work closely with them. I knew enough to be able to be rigorous and evaluate the data that I was seeing, but why would I want to do that? And that is what at least an academic institution wants to hear from somebody. They want somebody who's a collaborator, because all those people on that search committee, they're not looking to see, okay, I'm going to get a new rock star in our department. They're going to look for, oh, I'm going to get a great colleague, somebody I can work with, somebody we can bounce ideas off. And so that's an opportunity to say, I don't have that experience, but I don't need it because I can work well with others who have that experience, and show them that you need to give them metrics. So you got to show them, here, look at these papers I published with 15 different authors. You think it was like herding, cats, and it was great, and I loved it, and stuff like that. So I'll shut up now. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Mueller?
Perfectly answered. I can't add anything.
Anyone else would like to add anything before we move to the next question?
I actually do want to add one thing, and that is to say that there is no perfect candidate for something, there are not actually unicorns, right? Unless that job description was written for you because you wrote it and it's an internal hire and it's not out there anyway, right? So just for perspective, right? And also since COVID, so since 2020, there's been more understanding of gaps and how gaps happen in resumes. So I was thinking time gaps, but then everybody was talking about skill gaps, and I was like, yeah, that's you, right? But even skill gaps, if you have the opportunity to try and identify what, if you know what that is, but you know what that parallel piece is, that's something else where you can start to make that connection. Again, we're all coming from a space where we're lifelong learners. So, there's a huge expectation that everybody has gaps, everybody has weaknesses, right? I like to think of them as opportunities to learn something new. And if you reframe it like that, especially when you're talking in your interview, again, we all like to hear those things. And so, coming from that growth mindset space is going to also help.
Thank you. Before we move on, any questions from the audience? I'll wait for like 10 seconds.
Not from the chat box.
Okay. Okay, I'm just gonna move on. So can you guys share an example of an interview answer that particularly stood out to you? It can be either positive or negative. I think one of the panelists actually shared his experience with the first question. Dr. Burnett?
Yeah, I was hiring a postdoc, and he came into my office, and he had a different background from mine, mostly biology. Mine was more chemistry. And I was trying to figure out where the commonality and why. He had a great record. This is why I brought him in. So yeah, there's a reason why I brought him in. And so I needed to figure out why he ticked, because when you get in a postdoc, you want to, as an academic, want to see how can you help them, right? Because you don't want to get a postdoc that you can't help, because it's going to be a hard life for both of you. And he looked at me and he said, I was like, what do you want? what do you aim for? And he said, I want your job. And I was like, oh. I was like, I'm not giving you but I knew what he meant. And that was an answer like, oh, you're ambitious here now. Okay. And so that was a great moment. And we had a conversation, but like, tell them what it is that you want. Because any job that you're going to, they want to know how they can help you as much as how much you can help them. And he said he wanted my job. I didn't hire him because that's crazy talk. No, I did hire him.
Thank you. Dr. Shover?
That's a great story. I love that. I'm trying to think of so I don't have much direct experience with interviewing people in industry. I've only interviewed undergraduates for research positions in the lab, and I can think of candidates that stood out to me. I can't give you a specific answer, but I remember, two candidates that were really great in just the way they carried themselves and how they just seemed so like they were just so truly enamored with what we were doing in the lab that it didn't seem like anything else mattered. They weren't really intellectualizing their responses or what they were doing, their body language. It just felt like a conversation. And those stood out to me really well.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Mueller?
We could probably talk all day about this. No, I think it's to me, it's maybe not the answers, but the attitude is what you can sometimes see. You see people with a very positive attitude, and they mean it, and they really want to work for your organization. It's so refreshing. And there are people who have the attitude of like, well, you ought to give me this job. And why they deserve it. I come at it from an interesting perspective, in that being an HR person for the last 36 years of my life, I've been interviewing scientists for 36 years. So I've worked within the science community. I don't have a PhD. but it's often interesting to note how scientists, whilst discussing something with the HR person, will assume that the HR person doesn't know anything about science. And sometimes you just got to step back and say, you know what? When we are hiring engineers, we put people who know engineering into the engineering recruiting. When you're hiring scientists, we put people who understand a little bit about science, et cetera, or finance. So we do try and tailor our recruiting skills to the individuals that we're recruiting. But no, I think it gets down to the attitude and rather than specific answers. I've heard some spectacularly wrong answers in my time, which haven't stopped the person getting the job.
Thank you. Dr. Lecker?
So maybe a negative one.
Yeah.
So I had a candidate, and this is for an administrative position. And I don't remember exactly what the question was, but his answer was, I don't do that. And I go, but that's a requirement of the job. No, I don't do that. And anyway, you need me. Without me, your program will be dead. So I think here's a really negative attitude that certainly doesn't help you in passing an interview.
Thank you. Dr. Howell?
Yeah, so I've had a couple of these as the years have gone on, but I'm going to go also towards the more negative perspective. So hopefully you guys don't do this. But you'd almost think of an interview like being on a first date, right? You're getting to know each other, you're asking questions, you're trying to understand a person's background, what they do, what they enjoy, what their goals are. And just the worst first date ever, where you're trying to ask these questions and you get, I think Dr. Lecker mentioned this earlier, those 2 to 3 sentence answers, or even just a few words like that, I don't do that or something. It's like you got to give me a little bit more to work with, because I don't know about you guys, but I can't imagine collaborating with people that are going to speak like that in an everyday environment. And yes, nerves can play a little bit of a role in that, but typically, as the interview progresses, if it's nerves, it tends to like lessen a little bit as you're talking to the individual. So that interviewer can kind of tell if they're just nerves or if that's just how you're going to communicate. So just making sure that you're trying to make that first date as good as possible. You're giving them a little bit to work with so that you can kind of communicate effectively. And that person can get a feel for how you're going to be as a coworker.
Thank you. Dr. Costello?
Yeah, so the piece that I want to add to this is when you get to the end of the interview and someone says, do you have questions for us? And I've seen this, I've talked to and coached many, but the answer is not no. It's never, ever no, right? So if you get to the end of the, and you get to that, and you're like, no, I got no questions for you, right? That's a huge missed opportunity. Now, the caveat, if you've had a good conversation and you've asked all of the questions that you typed up and listed for yourself along the way, you might get to the end and be caught, right? Like, oh my gosh, I have to come up with something. But I hope, and please take notes while you're having those conversations so that you've got something there, or, if something's going to occur to you, you can write a quick note to yourself. I can ask this kind of question at the end, right? Something else out of that conversation. Tell me more about this, or, is this part of, I heard this, but is this actually part of this role? Or, come up with something on the fly so that you have a question in that moment for the do you have any questions for us question.
Thank you. So
Yeah, I would just, Tracy, if I could just add into that, a good one to have in your back pocket. A couple of questions like if you get to the end and you really don't have a question to ask. I mean, it's unusual that you wouldn't. I also am a little scared of people who don't have a question. But a good question which I've been asked before as an interviewer is like, so Raymond, why did you join Lilly? Why did you join the IRBO? And that's a nice way of them flipping it onto you. It allows them to gather their thoughts and their feelings about it. And frankly, it's a bit of a filler question to ask somebody, but it takes a little bit of the heat off you for a second or two. And yeah, I've been asked that question, and it gives me an opportunity as the interviewer to really pump up why I think it would be a great idea, especially if you're in the interview procedure and you say, I want this person. Darn, I really, really, really want this person to join my organization. And you get asked a question like that, that's a really nice opportunity to put the big sell on as to why it would be such a good idea to come and join this company. So keep one or two of those kind of questions in your back pocket and use them to your best advantage. Otherwise, as Tracy says, it's a huge missed opportunity for you.
Thank you. Alrighty, so for those who missed the introductions earlier, we will break you guys out into breakout rooms. The rooms will have a representative from academia and one from industry, so you guys can interact further with them. We're just gonna start breaking you guys out into rooms. Thank you.
And we'll get back to the room the last few minutes before the end of the hour, and then see you guys in a bit. Welcome back, everyone. We're waiting for people to come back. I think it has been a very productive session today. We are so grateful, but I'll wait for Nichelle to close our session. Nichelle?
I think Michelle, she's still in one of the rooms. Okay, now she's coming.
All right, Nichelle, we're ready for you to close.
Alrighty. We had some really good discussions today. Really enjoyed it. Thank you guys so much. Thank you to the panelists who agreed to participate. And as we were bombarding you with a bunch of emails every single day. Thank you for keeping up with them. And thank you for your time. If you guys have any burning questions, please feel free to email them to Neurotrauma. And we'll direct them to the appropriate panelists. In addition, the panelists are welcoming connections in LinkedIn, so you can find them and connect there. Thank you guys so much. This brings us to the end.
Thank you so much. Better luck, folks.
Thank you.